Church hurt. I am not going to ask for a show of hands, and I'm not talking about how comfortable or uncomfortable the pews are or aren't. But if you have ever experienced or known someone that has experienced church hurt, then this sermon is specifically for you. And I say that thinking that that pretty much covers everybody in this room. It would be very unlikely that there's even one person here this morning that has not been affected by what is known as, quote, church hurt. With that in mind, a definition. And I'm just going to read it to you. This comes from what is known as the Biblical Counseling Coalition. Here's how they express the idea in our modern vernacular, church hurt. That church hurt is the painful experiences of being exploited in the context of a local church. And they give some examples. This may be where spiritual language or even scripture can be leveraged to justify wrongdoing and protect offenders. It can also mean a wide range of things and experiences where someone is emotionally, mentally, spiritually, or even physically hurt by someone or several people within the church. And they say it seems to be everywhere. And over the past several years, they note that, yes, it has become somewhat of a buzzword. We have seen it pop up more in the last few years than previously. Church hurt. And then I did an informal survey, and all I did was post it on social media and ask for either comments or, given the sensitive nature of some of this, for people to message me directly. And I had a fair share of both occur over the last few days. And I said when I did this, I'm not going to share names or specifics. That should be a given, but you never know. But what I did is I did run all of the answers I got through a program. And so I'm going to read that with you this morning. That's a summary, without details, of some of the experiences people shared in that way. There were several themes that kept reoccurring. Some spoke of deep wounds, of feeling judged, excluded, gossiped about, misrepresented, or treated as a problem rather than a person. Some described leadership failures or spiritual language being used in ways that felt harmful or even dismissive. Some spoke of shady, being on the receiving end of, for example, of shady business deals, and then that same person leading a public prayer at worship was just difficult, to say the least. Or maybe being out in the world and seeing maybe even someone that's a member of the leadership participating in practices with others in the community, and that sometimes that hypocrisy is difficult to deal with. And so some shared the pain of hypocrisy, seeing a disconnect between what was professed and how people actually lived. But not all the reflections were about others. Some noted that their own words, their own misunderstandings, or even their own lack of knowledge of Scripture or immaturity in the faith contributed to strained relationships. Many described a quieter, though, kind of hurt, neglect, a lack of welcome. More than one person mentioned the concept of showing up as maybe as a visitor or a new member and being told to move because they were in somebody's spot or somebody was saving a seat for a friend of theirs. Or being ridiculed for using language that may have come from their background, and they're still learning and growing even, and yet being ridiculed for it. Feeling invisible or struggling to find a belonging and feeling like an outsider. And so it wasn't always dramatic wrongdoing, but sometimes small moments that accumulated into discouragement. Church hurts. Let's explore this some more this morning together from Scripture and what we see we can learn from from one's perspective, I think we have to look at it from both sides, or even three different sides. And I don't mean sides as in this absolute, well, you got your side and I got my side, but there's the side or the perspective of those who are on the receiving end of abuse or neglect or disagreements that go the wrong way. Then there are the people who have done that to other people. And even recognizing that sometime later, and what do I need, how do I think about it, and how can I try to make things better? And then you almost have this third side of, as God's people as a whole, there's a balance for us of responsibility and love as we interact with each other and with people that come our way. Church hurt. Let's break it down then into these two collections of words this morning, to investigate together both the wounds and weaknesses of God's people, and then the wisdom that is needed and the goal of worship. Wounds and weaknesses, wisdom and worship. We begin with wounds and weaknesses. The technical term, at least for the worst form of this, is fratricide. Fratricide. Or we usually just call it friendly fire. It's happened in the training field. It's happened on the battlefield. It happens when it is unintentional. It's an accident. It happens when someone thinks there's blanks or some type of round like that in their firearm, and that's not the case. But it also happens when it's intentional. Or sometimes investigations later show that even though the person claimed that it was an accident, they didn't know, or they didn't know where the person was or who the person, that it was on purpose after all. Regardless of motives, regardless of circumstances, friendly fire happens. Isn't that what we're saying this morning with church hurt? That it's a kind of friendly fire? That it's one thing for people, let's say, we use the phrase in the world, people that aren't a part of a church or people that aren't in our local church. I mean, it's one thing for them to act in a way that's inappropriate or to hurt us or to gossip about us or whatever. But someone put it this way, that church hurt, it feels like being stabbed with a knife when the person is looking right in your eyes. And I mean, it's that kind of pain that stings so more than just hurt by someone. And there are different levels and types of this. There is that leadership hurt where it's coming from the top down. There's just the people hurt where it's just the people being people, but we sometimes expect, we sometimes rightfully so, recognize that people that are following Jesus are supposed to be different and better in how they behave and how they love and treat one another. And when that doesn't happen, when even something that is far opposite of that happens, we hurt. Sometimes, sure, we just get our feelings hurt. We get annoyed at something. Sometimes we disagree with something that's taught, and it may or may not be that what is taught is just what is true and from Scripture, and we don't like it. That happens, but some of us have experienced real wounds that is really painful. We open up our Bibles and begin this morning with Psalm 55. Now, this is not the exact same context. I realize that. But the way that the psalmist expresses his pain, the sting of betrayal, it's one of the best scriptural examples of that kind of pain. The sting of betrayal. And you know what it's like when maybe it's a good friend, a spouse, a physical family member, a coworker. There are these different types of betrayal that hurt differently and sometimes hurt more than others. But there's something about church hurt. There's something about someone that is within the church family that hurts in a special way. Here we read, "For it is not an enemy who taunts me." I mean, we struggle sometimes with the world ridiculing us and persecuting us and mistreating us. We still struggle with that, but we are told to expect that and to prepare for that, and it doesn't really usually surprise us, or shouldn't, but he says it's not an enemy, then I could bear it. The rest of verse 12, "It is not an adversary who deals insolently with me, then I could hide from him." And do you see how easily you could put this in this context? These are the people I go to church with on Sundays. And then he says in verse 13, "But it is you, a man, my equal, my companion, my familiar friend." I mean, could we say this morning, it's you, my fellow church member. It's you, my preacher, my elder, my Bible Sunday school teacher, whatever. It's you. We used to take sweet counsel together. Within God's house, we walked in the throng. And there, for the psalmist day, you're right there in this basic idea of, we might put it that way today, we went to church together. We sat across the auditorium. Maybe we even sat on the same pew. And you did this. It hurts. And sometimes we resolve that, we try to solve and comfort that pain by, maybe we don't go. Maybe we don't go anywhere. Maybe we think, I need to find a different church, or maybe we go to the person, maybe we go to leadership. There's different ways we try and handle the pain. But for just a moment this morning, let's recognize that. And we're going to say more in just a moment about how some of these distinctions can be made, but the one thing we don't want to do as the people of God is invalidate people's hurt or somehow dismiss people's pain and feelings, regardless of anything else. I mean, let's say it was all totally a misunderstanding and can be easily resolved if that is made clear. The pain is still pain, hurt. Now, as I said, with that in mind, part of the other way to think about this is that sometimes we just don't like something and we get our feelings hurt, and that happens. I like these two quotes that someone put out, that not every disagreement is injustice. And that not every time, or I got that backwards, right? See, it's a quote for a reason, right? I should have just read it off the back of the wall. But anyway, not every disappointment, that makes more sense too, is injustice. And then yes, not every disagreement is abuse. And you may have heard the story of the person that goes to this congregation and they don't like the fact that the congregation teaches on this particular sin. And it's a long story. I'm not going to go into it, but it ends up being this reality that says, really, you don't want a church that doesn't tell you about sin and what's wrong. Now, you may not want to go somewhere and there may be an unhealthy way of going about it. And if all you ever talk about is what's wrong, that has its issues, but there's a healthy place to say this is wrong. There may even be healthy places, yes, for leadership to provide some discipline within what Scripture says. Ironically, some church hurt is preventable, or at least a person can deal with it better when there is a healthy level of accountability within the church. Hurt. That's more the wounds side of things. Why does it happen at all? And that's because the church is made up of people who are what? Who are human. That's the weaknesses side of it. The reason the wounds happen primarily is because of the weaknesses of human people. The church is beautiful and glorious because of her Lord. But the church is still people. And people do people things. And although, as we said earlier, correctly so, we should, in one sense, expect more of church people. That's not always reality. And there are a lot of people that walk into church buildings and even, yes, participate, and even, yes, sometimes are in church leadership, and they're not really following Jesus. Or sometimes it is because of human failure and disagreement that we're going to see things differently, and sometimes we're going to have some tension and things get difficult. Consider some examples in Scripture where individuals had to find ways to settle their differences. But one of the best blessings of being a part of a local church is being a part of a local church, is the people. Do you see where I'm going with this? One of the best arguments for the integrity of Christianity itself are Christians themselves. One of the worst problems of being in the church is being in the church with people. You could say that other phrase the same way. One of the worst detriments to the integrity of Christianity itself are Christians themselves. Now look at some of these examples with me. In Acts chapter 15, the Apostle Paul is headed out on his second missionary journey. He had gone with Barnabas and young Mark. We don't know exactly why, but in that first journey, Mark leaves early. Paul sees it as, hey, he's a quitter. He's not going with us this time. We can't have that. Barnabas is seeing it from the other angle that says, and maybe he's even thinking about a time in Paul's life when he had to help Paul and encourage him and help him in a different but similar way. And Barnabas is thinking, let's give him another chance. Maybe he's thinking like we could also argue, right? He was young, or maybe he had a good reason. And this gets so bad between two of the greatest leaders in the early church, the beloved Apostle Paul, the son of encouragement himself, that they have to part ways at this point. Now, yes, you can then say, well, and more people heard the gospel because now instead of one team going out, you have two teams of people because Barnabas takes Mark and Paul takes Silas, and you can see how there's some providence maybe, but it got so bad they had to part ways. Now, does that mean the answer is always with things like this, you have to separate or you have to? Well, no. But it's a biblical precedent that says even in the early church, things sometimes got so bad between leaders of the church because they were still human. Another example of this is in Philippians chapter 4. If you look at verse 2 of Philippians chapter 4, two people, and see, Paul didn't give the precursor that says, I'm not going to name names. Paul names names. In Philippians 4:2, he calls out two sisters who had some issue. Now, he doesn't get into the specifics of their problem. It's just these two ladies, they need to learn to get along, is how we would say it in our words today. Does he say they have to change their opinion? They have to just become doormats and they can't have boundaries? Well, no. But he says they need to find a way to work it out. They need to come together. It's another example of when it's not a new problem. The first century church dealt with this. We deal with church hurt. People get wounded with friendly fire on the training field. You might say that's in here. And church activities, when things are said or things are done, it happens on the battlefield. And you might think of that when we go out into the world. And then we still interact with each other. Or, as we mentioned a moment ago, we see our fellow church members interacting with the world or participating in ungodly practices or harmful in their influence toward other people. And it hurts. And there are people to this day that have, and it may be that their pain is associated with the place, with the people. Maybe their pain is just associated with church in general. There are people to this day who are not a part of a local church because of the pain. Wounds and weaknesses. But let's for a moment consider another part of this, and that's the healing part. It's possible to heal. You can't erase memories. You can't fix other people. You can't wave your magic wand and make the whole situation go away or make it all better again. But you can get better again. When friendly fire happens or any injury happens in a soldier's life, there's medical treatment. There may be physical therapy. There may be other types of therapy needed. And then there is the rest of the unit. And maybe if it was intentional, we're not talking about that person perhaps anymore, but the unit and the leadership has a role of encouragement, of trying to say we want to be welcoming, we want to be helpful, we don't want to invalidate hurt, but we also want to help people through that pain. And so there is a place for healing and a place for unit support. Or there's a place for healing and comfort from God. There's a place for going through, thinking through. There's a place for God's people, the family of God, to help. Put it back in a family situation. You get upset with cousin so-and-so and uncle, whatever their name is. Maybe it happens at the family gathering on Thanksgiving. And maybe you decide, I'm not going to associate. We're just going to do our own thing. We're not going back. Or maybe there is a way to find healing and reconciliation. Maybe the best answer is not always to quit the family, as it were. And maybe there are times when I need to guard my own heart. Part of the wisdom within Scripture is to guard my heart from things like bitterness. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 15. Let's read these two. They're close to each other. Hebrews 12:15 warns us of the root of bitterness. Bitterness, you don't have to water it. You don't have to fertilize it. It's like that pesky weed or that tree or bush that, even out in western Oklahoma, we can't be too picky, but there's still some limits to that, right? There's still some things that are annoying and you look at it and it grows a foot. That's kind of how bitterness works. You got to cut it out early or it grows and festers. And this applies to the person who's hurt, but this can be a lot of people involved. Hebrews 12, verse 14, or verse 15 says this, "See to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God," and he says that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble. So bitterness is not its own problem. It easily grows from hurt and pain and brokenness and broken relationships and failed leadership. And then bitterness itself raises its ugly head and causes trouble too. And then people become defiled. And maybe then I can fall into other sins. And maybe it's the whole situation can cause other deeper problems. Maybe it's that I walk away from Jesus when I am hurt by Jesus' body. And I have to find a way to separate but not separate. It became popular for a while. I really don't hear of it much anymore, but to say, give me Jesus but not his church or not the church. I'm going to follow Jesus. I'm going to be spiritual. I'm going to follow the Bible, but I don't need the whole organized religion thing. And some of that's because of church hurt. But you can't just sever the head from the body, right? There's a reason it's called his church, his body. We don't want to do that. We don't want to miss out on the reason he created the church, to have a family where we learn and grow and help each other, even to heal through some of our internal friendly fire wounds. But I do have to find a way to say, my allegiance is to Jesus, not the performance of people that at least claim to belong to him. And I will never walk away from my Lord because the people that are at least within name or following him aren't following him very well. Even so far as the best solution is not to quit gathering with God's people at all. Are there cases where maybe it is wisdom to find another congregation? Maybe. Is there wisdom in following the instructions we're given in Scripture when someone sins against you? We're told to go to them first. Eventually, if that doesn't work, to take it to the leadership of the church. Accountability. As we noted earlier, there's not a one-size-fits-all, fixes-all solution. But the one thing I don't want to do is let bitterness grow. Church hurt or any kind of pain like that is either a doorway for bitterness to seep in and take root in my heart and life, or grace. It's not on the screen, but I believe it's on the handout. The rest of the story with Paul and Mark is that years later, when Paul is nearing his death for that matter, he says, as he's getting real serious at the end of 2 Timothy, I want you to send Mark because he is useful to me. Not every church hurt story ends like that, but some of them do. The grace part may just be that I learned to fight bitterness in my own life. It may be that I grow myself, even if the relationship doesn't grow or get better. So Hebrews 12:15 says, watch out for bitterness. Now back up with me to chapter 10. Chapter 10 says this, and it's a good reminder this morning with pain and conflict. He says this in verse 24 of Hebrews 10, let us consider, and here's that almost third side, right? We need to make sure as the people of God, we're aware of this, we're mindful of this. Let us consider, he says in verse 24, how to stir up one another to love and good works. And then he says, not neglecting. And habits die quickly. They build slowly. I don't mean that we want being a part of a local church and coming to things like this morning just to be habitual. It's supposed to be more than that, but it's not wrong for it to be a habit either. He says, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another. And all the more as you see the day drawing near. Part of the way that I use God's wisdom with this hurt is by guarding my own heart. But I also have to learn to hold. I have to learn to hold my tongue. I'm not just talking about me, although I'm talking to me, talking to us too. What is it James warns about in James 3? That people who are her teachers and are in positions like that need to be extra careful. But then he gives an entire just warning about the power and the danger of the tongue. I don't have the numbers. I didn't include this in the question even for the informal survey. But I would estimate that a large percentage of church hurt would have never happened if somebody had just done this. You get me? I got to learn to hold. But more than just my tongue. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 31. We know this one. It's one of those, some of us talk about refrigerator verses. 1 Corinthians 10:31. Whatever you do, whether it's eat or drink, whatever you do all to the glory of God. What's the rest of that? Look at it. 1 Corinthians 10:31 through 33. In that same statement, do everything for God's glory, what does he then say? And what's the context of 1 Corinthians 10:31? It's dealing with matters of differences and disunity within God's people, a.k.a. church hurt. So whether you eat or you drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God. Give no offense to Jews or to Greeks. Those are two people out in society, two categories of people, or to the church of God. Now, this doesn't mean I walk on eggshells. This isn't about people being offended by the truth of the gospel. This isn't about being a doormat myself, as we said earlier. It is about being sensitive to people's conscience, to people's feelings, Give no offense to the church of God. And then Paul uses himself as an example. Just as I try, did you know it's biblical to be a people pleaser? In this sense, I try to please everyone in everything I do. What does that mean? Not seeking my own advantage, but that of many, that they may be saved. Big goal, glory of God. Smaller goal, people be saved. In the middle, I got to hold on to my own heart and life and in a sense hold back a little. That I don't even unintentionally put a stumbling block before someone else in their walk with Jesus. How do I do that? Here's a couple of final passages this morning. I help people. People that are weak in the faith, weak emotionally, maybe even weak physically. You could easily branch out some of the applications for this. I help them. I don't dismiss them. I don't tell them to get up and move. I don't tell them that, well, your kind don't really fit in here. I do this, not this. And then one of the best texts on human relationships ever written, of course written by God's Spirit through Paul. Romans 12:18. As much as it depends on you, be at peace with all people. And then what do you do with the rest of it? You let God have that. Vengeance belongs to God. It's appropriate to address significant matters. It's appropriate even to go to people or even to go to church leadership for accountability. But at the end of the day, it is not my place to strike vengeance. I'm going to be at peace as much as I can be, and I'll let God sort out the rest and help myself and others glorify God and be right with God. Church hurt. The wounds are real because the weaknesses are still here. From one standpoint, it might be nice if, let's say, the baptistry was magical like that, and overnight, you're a perfect person. But God knew what He was doing when Jesus came and shed blood to provide forgiveness for people that are far from perfect or sinless. He also knows what He's doing when He says, it's in the church, globally and yes, locally, where people grow and learn and are transformed by my Son to be more like my Son. Wounded, yes, but not without hope. And one day, the people of God who are loyal to King Jesus in this day, who have put Him on in baptism and continue to live for Him, yes, falling down sometimes and failing and hurting other people, yes, being hurt by other people, but staying loyal to Jesus and working to get better, those people will one day be the church, glorified forever and perfected forever in Jesus. We said earlier, you don't want to separate the two too much, but you got to make some line of distinction. But let's not forget that one of the biggest lessons we learn from Jesus Himself is how to deal with us, with difficult people. And we use that like a label, but couldn't we all be in front of the line for that? And it's not the same thing, okay? I don't mean that at all. But I do wonder, what if Jesus had said we were too much to put up with? Again, this is oversimplified, and I don't want this to just be this emotional appeal ending, but personally, I wonder, what if Jesus had quit and said, these people hurt me too much? Now, does that mean He never critiques His people? Yeah, He does. But He keeps loving us. Maybe there's something for us in church hurt that says, There are going to be different ways I handle things. But the promise, in a sense, I make to myself is I'm going to love Jesus because he first loved me. And through the ups and downs of my own failures in doing this, I'm going to love you too. Let's love God and love people through the hurt. Now, let's stand and sing together.